Hey everyone, for the first time in 78 shows, our streaming platform was having some issues, but we are here now. We're excited to be here and to have you get to connect with our guest, Michael Uram, today. When I was growing up, my mom made the most special birthday cakes. One day, a newly decorated cake was sitting on the counter, and my little brother just reached up and dragged his fingers through the frosting to take a taste. When my mom saw what he had done, my brother said, "I didn't do it, my hand did it." Many students are struggling with the adjustment back to the classroom and homework. It's easy to blame the difficulties on the pandemic, and I'm sure that is a big factor. But how do we help our kids get past that so they can take responsibility and control? Today, we're exploring ways to help our neurodiverse learners take charge of their thinking, emotions, and choices. We'll look at friendships and ways you can connect with your child right where you are. This is LD Expert Live. Welcome to LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning differences, dyslexia, and attention challenges. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers and author of At Wit's End, A Parent's Guide to Ending the Struggle, Tears, and Turmoil of Learning Disabilities. This book will help you understand why some bright children and teens struggle in school and what can be done to change that permanently. To get a free copy, go to parentsatwitsend.com. Let's say hello to Lauren, our moderator and the Director of Clinical Growth and Operations for Stowell Learning Centers. Good morning, Lauren. We made it.
Good morning. We did. And if you've been sticking around and are there in the chat, let us know that you're here. I know a lot of you were posting that you're excited to see today's show. So let us know that you're here and where you're checking in from. Post your questions and comments for Jill and today's guests in the chat, and we will answer those in a little bit.
Thanks, Lauren. If you're just joining us, this is LD Expert Live. I'm your host, Jill Stowell. Our guest today is Michael Uram. Michael is a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed professional clinical counselor that specializes in treating ADHD, Asperger's, autism, and OCD through cognitive behavioral therapy and collaborative problem solving. Welcome, Michael.
Jill, it's nice to be on the show, and I'm so glad that we were resilient and we're able to work out the technical issues and be able to have a great conversation.
Well, it's really nice to have you here today. We've really appreciated having you as a resource for our families in our Irvine, California center.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Michael, who do you primarily serve in your practice?
So at Uram Family Therapy, we serve a wide range of clients. My specialty is actually working with individuals diagnosed with ADHD, Asperger's, and autism, where I primarily use cognitive behavioral therapy, where I really help them change the way they think about situations and use executive functioning skills to solve many problems. And my goal is to be able to help my clients be more themselves. So oftentimes it's them coming up with these great, amazing ideas to be able to make their own lives better.
Oh, I love that. Helping them be more themselves and letting them guide that. You know, you mentioned Asperger's, and I just want to acknowledge that Asperger's is now under the autism spectrum umbrella, but I still like that term because there is just this particular thinking style associated with Asperger's that helps us understand the person better. We have been focusing on executive function this month on LD Expert Live because of all the challenges students have been experiencing with the adjustment back to the classroom. What are some of the issues you're seeing now that kids are well into the school year?
So the most unique thing that I didn't anticipate seeing was actually a feeling of burnout this year. So I actually work with a lot of teachers, and throughout the years, they've had some degree of burnout, just feeling emotionally exhausted, feeling overwhelmed, and feeling like they didn't always find like the purpose in what they were doing. And I'm actually seeing a lot of this reflected in kids. So when I'm working with them with executive functioning skills, I often really take a step back to see what's really driving them right now. What would give them the passion or motivation to then keep working on these executive functioning skills? And most of the time, it is them feeling like their emotional battery is filled up. And a lot of kids are feeling a little bit drained a few months into the year, because last year and half of the year before, the expectations that they had for performing in school were much lower. The time limits weren't as strict. So now getting back to full steam academic work isn't always just working on the skills to get your work done and to be able to get the grade that they're looking for. It's really about finding that purpose and why am I going to school, and finding the energy to be able to get up on time and out the door.
Wow, I hadn't really thought about it like that. And of course that, there are so many things now. It's going to affect their timeline for getting work done, and they've got to get along with others and navigate, around a lot of other people. And so you probably run into this question: what is the pandemic, and what is, the ADHD or ASD, what, how do you separate that out? Or do
My
you?
strategy for separating it out is coming from the theory of acceptance and commitment therapy. So in ACT, you really try to figure out what things are going in your life that you can accept, you can tolerate, and then what do you have control over? How can you live out your values? So in that framework, a lot of times my clients are able to separate, right now, whether they feel like they have the energy to do so. So we kind of do an energy check-in. We do like a reasoning skill check-in. We do a cognitive distortion check-in. So if they have a lot of things in line and they just don't have the energy, we focus on the pandemic being an issue. If we feel like there's a lot of things set up for them to be successful and they are still losing their material, they are still struggling to be able to get projects completed on time, especially whenever we're at the boring part, we use our intuition, our abductive reasoning to just say, you know what, I think this is more related to the diagnosis that you have as opposed to the community situation that we're all going through.
Very interesting. You mentioned the word cognitive distortions, which I think is kind of fallacies in the student's thinking, right? Can you explain that a little bit?
So under the theory of cognitive behavioral therapy, we really have this aspect of cognitive distortions that became popular by this theory that David Burns is just putting forward, that anytime we look at information, we see it through the filter of our own eyes, our own experiences. So sometimes we do something called all or nothing thinking. So a lot of individuals that I help that are diagnosed with Asperger's may go to the extremes of whatever situation that they're facing, and then say that this is absolutely going to work, or this is never going to work, and you see a meltdown because they're viewing it without the gray area. So that's all or nothing thinking. We have another one where we're kind of looking at things and saying, well, am I overgeneralizing this? If I did poorly at school today, or the teacher said I really didn't, do my best, am I a bad student? Am I a bad person? So whenever you take one event and overgeneralize it to many scenarios and feel a little bit hopeless, you're using the overgeneralization cognitive distortion. So we have about 15 to 30 of them, but usually in practice, we focus on maybe 3 or 4. And whenever you're able to figure out that you're seeing the world accurately, you know that you're really working through cognitive distortions. And that's where a lot of the work can then truly begin, is whenever you really know what you need to work on and that you're seeing things realistically.
And I like that. It's like you can label what it is, and so that increases your awareness of when it's happening. Yeah,
absolutely. And the more that you're able to be comfortable being wrong is the first step forward. So a lot of kids, I really try to build up their self-esteem, that whenever we would change our perspective of something, or we would say, I made a mistake, it's okay to feel those negative feelings. It's okay to kind of sit in that uncomfortability, because we know that there's growth coming out of it. Whenever you think of things with a growth mindset, is I didn't figure this out yet, or maybe I've been doing this for a while, but I don't have to keep doing it. I believe in myself enough that I don't have to keep believing something or doubling down on something that I know is wrong.
And kind of reframing things that wow, when you notice, that you've got this fallacy in your thinking, or you made a mistake, that's huge. That awareness is is mature and important. So.
Absolutely. Because I think that's actually the driver for procrastination, is if we're not in that moment to really acknowledge that, maybe we're not seeing things realistically or accurately. I have seen a lot of kids really procrastinate and push off the really important things for them to work on. And knowing that the work may take years and years to get done, I can see that would be like the core of your cognitive distortions at play in your own life.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to talk about procrastination because that really does seem to be a big challenge for students. And so talk a little bit about how you help students work through that.
Mhm. So under the framework of collaborative problem solving, it's skill, not will. If a child's really struggling to get work done, it's not that they're just being really resistant for no particular reason or just defying us for no particular reason. It literally is a lacking skill. It is likely an executive functioning skill of being able to tolerate that distress of continuing with your work rather than going to the easier or funner kind of activity. Our brain tries tricking us into going to those things because we know there's going to be like a little dopamine burst. There's going to be kind of fun activities and whatever the thing would be other than the really challenging thing in front of us that we eventually would be proud of ourselves for. So I kind of flip that framework around is let's talk to future you. The number one technique for figuring out how to not procrastinate is to get started with the smallest little bit. So you say, have a conversation with future you, whether it's 5 minutes now from you, 5 minutes from now you, or 5 years from now you. Talk to them about, how much you'd be really proud of yourself, where if you just get started on reading the instructions, you don't even have to get started with the rest of your work. How proud would future you be of you if you just did this tiny little bit, this small little effort to just read the instructions? You don't even have to be tested yet with how smart you are or whether you remembered what the teacher said in class. So procrastination starts with getting out of your head and being able to find the smallest bit of behavior that's in line with whatever that goal would be. And most of the time it's getting homework done or going on your phone or tablet or something right after school, because a lot of times kids are exhausted. And if you get that feeling of comfortability, like you've got all of your school stuff done, you're just sitting on the couch or your bed or something with a device, it's incredibly difficult to then get back to that desk and get started with that work. So the smallest little bit at the start, I've seen to be the most effective tool.
And, I find with students, we have to teach them how to do that. What does the smallest little bit look like? Because really, when you look at an assignment, it feels like, well, it's the whole thing. I have to do the whole thing, or I haven't done anything. But if we can really dialogue and teach them, the smallest little bit is putting your name on the paper or opening your book. And each of those little things that they do, then they kind of get that little dopamine reward also, and start to get them moving forward. So I like that.
Yeah. So absolutely. Whenever I talk to kids, I kind of say like, how good is your prediction engine? So how good are you at predicting things and like figuring out how long these different things would take? So I have them make bets with themselves, because there's a lot of evidence where if we're able to just like make something out of a game, that's something that otherwise would be really challenging, we have a higher chance of engaging with it as well. Mm-hmm. So taking a little bit of that game theory into play is, I think that it'll take me 3 minutes to just figure out how many questions I have to answer about the reading. Okay, so, I did it. Yeah. Oh, I was actually right. I knew it'd take 3 minutes. Your prediction engine gets better. Yeah. So one of the biggest things for kids is really understanding that they get really good at predicting things. Because if their prediction is that it's going to take 6 hours to get through this assignment, well, your abductive reasoning, your just, intuition tells you that chances are the teacher didn't give you 6 hours of work each day. That's kind of odd for them to do. And if they really did give you 6 hours of work, you can go to mom or dad or just any like reliable adult and say, should it take 6 hours? And they'll probably tell you no. If it does, we'll talk to your teacher and we'll figure out through your 504 IEP, like how to be able to make sure that you're not spending 6 hours every night. You deserve to have some free time. So let's make it reasonable that we get your work done instead of something where every day, the moment you get home, you're just working till you go to sleep. Because that's when kids truly give up, is whenever they feel like they don't have a solid, estimation of how long it'll take or a solid person to rely on, that if their plan fails or if it is too much work, that it's okay to stop. It's okay to not complete it because it's beyond what should be expected.
Right. That whole idea of prediction, first of all, again, I love labeling things because it's just easier. It's more concrete to hold on to. So I love that prediction engine. But also, that is really a part of executive function, being able to predict what will happen in the future, predict how long things will take. So great stuff. Parents, of course, do not want their kids to fail. And so they may find themselves really hovering over their kids to make sure that they stay on task and get everything done.
Mhm.
How can parents shift that responsibility to their kids?
So depending on your child's diagnosis, you really figure out from the time that they're born until the time that they're off on their own, which isn't 18, you get to figure out what different skills I'd like to teach my child. Or if it's really difficult for them to be able to, adapt, how do we accommodate this skill? And whenever you view it as a responsibility of giving them as many skills as possible, as opposed to it's your responsibility if they fail, you have a much higher chance of allowing your child to take on the responsibility of something that you may not be sure that they could take on. Because you'll be waiting in the wings, and they'll know that if they start struggling with something and their usual guesses of how to figure it out aren't working, they can come to you and ask you for advice. So most, 9th to 11th graders, like seniors are already kind of like, checked out. But 9th to 11th graders, they really want to get the GPA they need to be able to get into the college that they want, or be able to, get to the point that they can graduate. A lot of the times they'll push away their parents because parents are taking on too much responsibility for that child's success. So the more that your child is closer to, that evaluation line, it's really important to give them that responsibility, because those are those opportunities to learn. Those are those opportunities to grow. So if you go to an elementary school child, this is your opportunity to be able to really figure out, as you give them different tools or techniques, or you give them the opportunity to know that they can do it. And if it's a struggle, that they have people to go to. That's how you transfer that responsibility, and they feel more responsible for the task in front of them. And it can be something as simple as remembering to, set the placemats for dinner, or to be able to remember to take their lunchbox out and put it on the counter for mom to go through, or put tomorrow's lunch there. All of those small little acts of responsibility give a child those little bits of self-esteem that build up your emotional battery, so you can be more resilient, you can handle more things. Because the more that they feel confident in all those small tasks that they achieved, they end up being incredibly successful and being proud of themselves.
And we were talking last week, I think, with Sarah Ward about executive function. And she was talking about this too, with, this workability as kids are growing is really important for their success when they go into college and become young adults. So important.
That was a great episode, by the way. I love the turkey cookie idea, and always thinking of executive functioning as, you do different tasks and make everyday things an opportunity to learn and enjoy yourself too.
Right. Well, Michael, now that students are back on campus, difficulties with friendships are starting to show up. What are some important things that kids need to understand about making and keeping friends?
So one aspect that I really saw with so many kids that I helped throughout the pandemic, or through, at-home learning in some way, is the just absolute loneliness that they felt. Because there's so many different in-between class activities, or walking to class, or just downtime in the class, that they now have that opportunity to connect with each other. And they were so hungry for this connection, because so many kids kind of you burn out kind of those relationships, through March 2020, through, July 2020. I felt so many kids lost that friendship group. So the best thing that I've seen kind of, in the last few months now, when most kids are back in a classroom environment, is really enjoying and seeing that this isn't a guaranteed thing to be able to have that downtime with friends. And I teach them small little skills. So bit by bit, they can build up those relationships. So we start with, just the appreciation task. So my couples therapy kind of transport into this is, in the Gottman method for couples, they recommend that any couple has 10 positive interactions for every 1 negative. So for a lot of kids, and just socialization in the broader group, before you have a close friend, notice and observe other people in your classroom, and really notice something that they're doing right, and just be able to reflect that to kids that you potentially would want to be your friend, that you would like to be able to include in your group. And in those moments, you then get the reputation of being the kid that makes other people shine. So even if we see something negative and it makes us feel good that we're better than them at whatever that task would be, do not mention that. That could be a potential negative to them. So the more that they can just start with that filter, social skills wise, of stating that no one needs to hear negative feedback from me. We're just getting back. We just need to be able to build up our energy, our, positive feeling about ourselves. So if I'm able to observe someone and just tell them something good or something interesting about themselves, or even ask them something good or interesting about themselves and change the conversation to that, from just, hey, how's it going? And to, hey, man, what's going well today? If you're able to get someone to think a positive thought in some way, you're more likely to have some kind of bond. So the second aspect of that is the social skills is how do you follow up with that? Like, what are their parents' rules for like having you over after school, or whenever you're working on a team project? How can we make that happen in a way that we're really laughing and connecting? And oftentimes it still is adapting to, kind of the stay-at-home learning of saying, let's actually just, play a video game together later. Let's, go on Minecraft together. Let's figure out something, or get your username in any of those, games. So they have a chance of still being able to have that connection outside of a school environment, while really building that opportunity to connect with someone whenever you are face-to-face. So it's having continuity of connection.
Those are such good suggestions and good ways of thinking. And obviously it takes practice. How do you help kids to do that? I mean, you can't go to school with them, so.
So the best thing that's, kind of worked now is kids are back playing handball. They're back doing a lot of things where it'd be engaging in some way where you could do a task with another kid. So oftentimes the last thing you want to do is say, hi, my name is blank, can I join? Oftentimes when you do that, you just give the opportunity for them to reject a stranger from joining in whatever they're doing. You want to be able to make yourself useful in whatever that task would be. And you want to be able to give them the opportunity to share what they're really enjoying. So for kids, I say those two particular things: make yourself useful and really give that person the opportunity to share what they're doing. Because every kid loves showing, like, hey, I'm doing this. You want to see this? So if you're able to engage in either of those emotions, I've really seen kids say, like, well, okay, so, let's say K through sixth grade. You really want to give them that downtime in the classroom to break up into pairs. Anytime as a teacher, you would break kids up to pairs, you have a higher chance of them having a deeper conversation outside of what the task is as well. So for kids, it's then asking, like, oh, when we get broken up in pairs, can I be whoever so-and-so's pair? Whenever kids advocate for themselves or feel the confidence to advocate for themselves, it often translates into that social skills, kind of hierarchy of, wait, if I advocate for myself and I say I really want to sit next to you, that other kid feels important. And even though they don't know anything about me, they know that that someone else thinks I'm cool enough to sit next to. So it's the same thing as when you have lunch, like, hey, can I sit next to you? Anytime you can give someone recognition that they're good enough and that they're worthy of being a good friend, you're making progress.
And I find that a lot of times, I mean, we can talk about these things, but we really have to practice or give them language and practice using that language.
Yeah.
And role play. I find role playing is really powerful because as parents or therapists, we can't go to school with our kids. And so role playing gives them that opportunity to practice.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we often do in therapy here is just role play a situation, because you're right. The more that you're able to just have that experience, having the conversation and kind of problem solving where the conversation may go, it's not a new task. It's not an unfamiliar thing whenever you're doing it for the first time, whenever your heart's beating really fast and you just want to exit the situation a little bit. So the more that you can become familiar with the process, the more likely you are to do so. So we can spend maybe 20 or 30 minutes out of most sessions just going through and rehearsing what that would be like, and then doing the task together and then practicing the skills of the task.
And that's so true. Then it doesn't feel brand new. Yeah. Something that we have found to be a really helpful extension of role playing for our students is to have them visualize and talk themselves through a new strategy or scenario that they're going to try. So if they And then we like to have them visualize and verbalize again before they go to bed, because then their brain gets to work on that during the night when learning from the day gets set into memory.
Absolutely.
So, Michael, you had a book come out earlier this year called Parenting and Asperger's, a practical handbook to help you and your child navigate daily life. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you. I
Tell us
appreciate
a
it.
little bit about the book.
Sure. So in the book, I realized that there's a lot of practical strategies that I use in therapy that so many other books out there don't really give parents. They may give you for the child exactly what to do, or for parents, it gets a little bit too theoretical. For me, I just gathered together all the different things that I usually tell parents and help kids with in a typical session. So I kind of gathered together all of my gems of information and made it really down to earth, really practical, and really fun. There's a lot of interventions in there that you can do whenever you're just, out to dinner with your child, or there's just a little bit of downtime at home and you really want to give them, the skills or tools to be able to self-regulate and to be able to improve their executive functioning skills a little bit without it feeling too formal.
Well, I got the book right after we talked, and it is great. It is a very practical, easy to read book. It addresses all kinds of everyday questions that you might have as you live and grow with your child with Asperger's. And after we check in with our viewers, we'll come back to this because Michael has some fun strategies that you can use. So let's check in with Lauren and our viewers, and then we'll talk about some ways to improve communication and connection with your neurodiverse children.
Hello. So we have some people checking in. They stuck with us, and I'm also kind of navigating two platforms because there's still people posting in Facebook. So stick with us. We have Terrence checking in saying hello. We have Pamela checking in saying hello. We have Deanna. Hi, Deanna. I know her from West Covina, California, saying hi. And Hillary from Yorba Linda, California, saying hi. Hello and welcome. And Karen from Sacramento checking in, saying hi. And then we have a question from Deanna. She is saying, my 2E son wants to listen to music or a podcast while he does his homework. He's in 6th grade, but it takes him 4 hours or more on homework each night. He works really hard. He needs the Chromebook for parts of his homework. So what can she do? And we've heard similar questions to this where kids are insisting they can multitask. They're insisting they can. So any advice for her?
So in my practice, I get asked this question rather often. What happens when my brain is going faster than the work that's in front of me? The kids feel like they have a little bit of downtime when in reality you don't. Your brain is just overwhelmed with information and a lot of it's not relevant. So they tell me that if they're listening to music or have some other distraction, they can tune out all of the other noise that's coming into their brain at that moment by having music or listening to a podcast. So I talk to them, well, what's your productivity rate? So for a lot of 2E kids, they love talking about their productivity rate. I can get so much done if I listen to something. And it really depends, because all the research that I've read one way or the other says if you listen to something with words in it, at least your language processing center has to devote some part of its effort towards whatever that material would be. And sometimes when you're listening to music, part of your other brain or creative reasoning isn't impacted too much, but just a little bit. So it's more for me about giving that child autonomy to problem solve for themselves, how much time that they would like to spend on this task with how much they'd like to spend with their coping skill, attached to this task. And then other times you'd even invite your child let's figure out, can we just record it one time and see what it's like observing you? Because now as a parent, I just look in the door every once in a while and see, it looks like you're not that productive. It looks like you kind of got too into that distracting activity and it's been a half hour since you got any work done. So as a parent, I think that's too long of a gap. So the more you have a dialogue with your child about how much of a break or how much of a distraction or how much it impact your productivity, you're really imparting those skills of self-regulation, as opposed to setting up an arbitrary limit that, as an expert would say, or some other article that you read, it's not really about the time. It's about your ability to self-regulate while in front of the task that you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that, because we hear about kids doing this all the time and saying, no, I work better like this. That is a coping strategy that they're actually using to try to quiet, that part of their brain that's thinking very quickly, or they're like a filter almost.
That is the answer that I get from the majority of kids. Sometimes it's a different answer. They'd say like, whenever I'm, listening to this podcast, I'll never get to listen to it any other time. You make me go to school, you make me travel home, you make me do dinner, I'm doing a sport. I really love, listening or, watching the streamer, and this is the only time I get to do it. So it's fun for me. So I won't really want to do that work because you already got enough out of me today. I want to negotiate that I still get to do this fun thing while doing something that I don't want to do. That's a lesser or less common answer, but the majority is usually it helps me focus.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard anyone explain it that way, but I mean, it makes sense. I just hear kids tell us all the time, well, I do better, and even though the evidence clearly states that they don't. So I really like that idea of documenting and recording
and experimenting and exploring. I think, that also is what our executive function does. We try something and we evaluate, how did it work? Do I need to change it? And so, as you said, as opposed to putting this arbitrary limit on them that they're going to then feel really negatively about, let's check it out and see, because if your goal is to be really productive, let's see which way it works best for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that holding off of judgment of whether it's working or not. It's really hard as a parent as well.
Mm-hmm.
So like with so much of a, advocacy on STEM kind of experiences, that's the scientific method. Or even like, a lot of like advertising companies do A/B testing. Like we'll try it this way, we'll try it that way. So whenever you have your child just understand those concepts of experimentation in the scientific method, it doesn't matter so much that night whether they got their homework done or not, but they really learned how to evaluate things. And whenever you just really improve your reasoning skill set, you likely have less experiences where you are arguing with your child or trying to assert like your, authority that I know that this doesn't work, so you need to do it my way. Because anytime that you do that with a child, you really lose their trust. But sometimes you gain compliance, and sometimes you really need to gain compliance, but hopefully it's as infrequent as possible.
Makes sense. Love it. Yeah. We have a friend of the show, and Michael, you know her as well, Debrianna Farian. We've had her past guest. She says, hello, Michael, Jill, and Lauren. Happy Tuesday. She followed us. See, I know she was championing for us in Facebook, and that didn't work. So she followed us on over to YouTube and says hi. She's been on our show before, and she definitely gets these kiddos helping the behaviorally challenging child. Yeah. And so an organization that we both work with. It's great. We have Hillary.
Is amazing. Yeah.
They are. We plug for them. Absolutely. Hillary is asking, my child is 5 and has ASD level 1 and ADHD, but doesn't qualify for a 504 after being tested. Interesting. I'm finding it difficult to navigate the lack of executive functioning skills with his teacher. Any advice?
So oftentimes when I have parents come to me with these concerns, I usually say, well, it sounds like the teacher's not up for the heavy lifting or solving this problem on their own. Because when I say like you don't qualify or like we can't give you that support, it usually means that that teacher is overwhelmed with everything else that they have to manage in some way. But it really comes across as being a personal attack of saying your kid's not important enough for us to do something. And usually like with an IEP, if you have that diagnosis, you likely do have an IEP, let alone a 504, which is a voluntary agreement. So my concern is that the school may be a little bit more resistant to just saying, how can we really help, or what can we do, and how can we go above and beyond? So I do feel for you that they would say that you don't qualify for a 504 or IEP based on that diagnosis. But for executive functioning skills wise, I'm a huge fan of just saying, how do we assess this? How do we figure out particularly what those skills are? So whether that is getting a licensed psychologist on board or, a center like yourselves, how do we figure out what this deficit is? And how do we come up with particular tasks to improve this? And how do we make it as simple or easy as possible for any academic personnel to be able to enforce this or give our kids those tools, considering that they really don't want to go above and beyond as much as we would hope that they would.
And, sometimes I think that and I don't know what your situation is, but sometimes I think that teachers, they don't really know what to do differently. And so if you have one or two simple suggestions that you feel like would really help your child, and you could talk to the teacher, a lot of times with our elementary school teachers, even without a 504, if there is something that they can do and it's not too challenging, but something simple that they can do, they're usually pretty willing to do that. But you may have to say, here's what would be really helpful and here's why, and see if they would engage with that, and then you can bring some other suggestions in, a little at a time, so that they don't feel overwhelmed as well.
Yeah, she adds that no IEP was given. He didn't test within the limits to receive one, and that it's challenging. And this is what we hear all the time from 2E families. It's challenging with a 2E kid because they're bright and highly verbal. So the deficits might not come out in testing.
Especially that young age, right?
Right. But usually with the diagnosis, they're supposed to provide an IEP just with those diagnoses.
Right. And the other thing is that, again, often educators don't specifically understand that population. And I mean, the child is bright, they're verbal, it doesn't seem like there could be reasons why they need extra support. And so, again, we're going to, as a parent, you may be in the position of having to educate your educator.
We see it
So
all the
I want to
time.
bring this back to Deborah Ann for a second. So there was quite a few families that we collaboratively worked with where this was the case. So kids were just entering in the educational system, just recently diagnosed, but not getting the support or compassion that they would from educators. And the amount of collaborative problem solving training that Deborah Ann has done for local school districts, it's really important as a parent to advocate for the school to get trained in collaborative problem solving. Because if they see the child kind of, having an issue throughout the day, it doesn't matter what a sheet of paper says. You see a child dysregulating, you see a child really, not really connecting with what the goal is for what the teacher really needs from them. They then feel left out. They feel rejected. And if you feel negative emotions, you're likely not going to connect with the rest of whatever the teacher has in store for you the rest of the day. So it's truly just asking that child for the teacher is, how do I, for the child to say, like, I don't feel good, have your child practice self-advocacy and say to the teacher, like, I see to the child, have the teacher say to the child, I see that you're having a rough time. What's up? What's going on? And even if they don't have really clear language for what's going on, they can give them some clues about, what is up with the environment that's really leading them to feel uncomfortable. And oftentimes for a 2E child, it's like, this is kind of boring and I want to be able to do something a little bit more engaging. So they have like a little activity box that they take with them to kindergarten is what different things can I do as the other kid's really struggling with scissors and I cut something out that's really cool looking. How do I figure out that I can be the helper to be able to do extra tasks in the classroom? How do I, be in charge of like all the different like reading books and handing them out or helping with supplies or, just feeling appreciated that my brain works really fast and I get through some stuff. Then other times I'm overwhelmed and I need a break and I need some space. So the two things is for a teacher to give that child more responsibility of things that they'd be proud in and giving them a cool down space. Any, beanbag opportunity to just go to a certain corner of the room and not have expectations that the other kids have whenever they're particularly struggling.
Great suggestions.
I want to just tag on here. There is a virtual seminar coming up. I don't have the reference for it right now, but Deborah Ann, if you're still listening, if you can pop that in the chat for us, HBCC is hosting that, and it kind of specifically, I think, is going to address some of these questions with the 504, the IEP. How do you get the school to support and understand your behaviorally challenged child a little bit better?
Yes, I believe it's on December 9th. We are attending some people in our organization. So if we have that, I have the email we can post in Mom Squad. We can attach, in the chat, I think maybe in the comment section after the show. It won't let us post in the chat after the show, but we can attach some of that information. Yes, I would definitely suggest that. Hillary does say she's already connected with Deborah Ann. She's taken her class. That's why I was seeing those comments come in that she's connected. I love it. See, it's a community here. And she says, great ideas. Thank you. So I love it when everybody's connected, but that is a resource. It's for educators and parents of just a different approach to, dealing with the school system. My children go to a private school, and they've been working with Deborah Ann. She works with the teachers in that organization. And it's an amazing resource when you get people who get these kids. So we will try to get that information to anyone watching and post it. And if not, you can see that in Mom Squad is our private Facebook group, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Just one more question, and then I know you have some important things, especially related to video games coming up, and I want to make sure we get to that because that's the other big question that parents have. Pamela is asking, do you know of any therapists in the San Fernando Valley area, so outside of the Orange County area, particularly in the San Fernando Valley area, that you could recommend or that we can post later?
Yeah. I don't know of anyone specifically in the San Fernando Valley area, but I do know that recently, one of our local therapists, Steve Kafari, got certified in collaborative problem solving and offers telehealth. Like for myself, I'm booked until January sometime, but I know there's other therapists around that have availability and have experience with collaborative problem solving, which may be ideal.
Perfect. Great. And we'll provide your contact information at the end of the show, as well as any links that we referenced so that people can get a hold of you and find these resources. Okay. Keep posting, parents. These are great questions. I know a lot of these things really resonate with our parents of these kids because they are so exceptional. So keep posting. We'll check back in one more time before the end of the show.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Well, Michael, parents really want to connect with their kids, but when they're thinking and their child's thinking is very different, it can be kind of baffling to know how to do that. So how can parents connect with their very bright, very different thinkers, especially those with Asperger's or ADHD?
So essentially, I approach parents and say, well, don't shame the game. Sometimes kids that are really into online games, or they have a lot of just outlets that you may not really understand so well, it's really important to understand what they're doing in those particular games and how that is, potentially a beneficial experience. Or sometimes it can get into gaming addiction. It can be really unhealthy. But the more time that you'd spend observing your child or really understanding what they're doing in those games, you have a higher chance of being able to push it towards that direction, that they're really getting something beneficial out of them, as opposed to it being a detriment. So I'll first go over the negatives a little bit, and then I'll get into the positive. So if your child is spending so much time online, they're not getting work done, it's a problem. If your child is having more emotional outbursts, or they've broken a controller, it's a problem. If your child is starting to interact with peers that are 2 years older, or even, more than that, we've got a problem. So whenever you think of the general outlines is make sure your child's safe online, there's a lot of really great ways that they can engage in learning, not even realizing that most of the games they actually like are just amazing at teaching some of these skills. So for particularly my elementary school crowd, Roblox is huge. So ROBLOX. It's actually a game system where you can create your own games. So a lot of kids, particularly the 4th through 6th graders, have made their own games through Roblox. It teaches you the basics of understanding reasoning skills, connecting things, and it's down to earth. And further level, they can create at least the basic game. And it's just like going to class. So if you ever had your kids do like the ninja coding or like those kind of, learn how to code for Roblox or Minecraft, it's essentially, there's a lot of those tools online, and it's really beneficial to learn how to connect reasoning skills. I've seen kids go on Minecraft and really say like, well, I want to figure out how to sequence things. So one time a kid's like, well, I figured out like with, redstone, if I connect this to this and I figure that other thing out. It's all about STEM learning. It's all about just understanding how those things can really be transferable outside of the video game. And even more importantly, like for executive functioning skills, if you're able to really use your reasoning to observe an environment and then be able to succeed at the game, you feel more confident, you feel happier, and you feel sometimes connected to other people that have a similar experience. So like, for example, there's one kind of like sub game, it's a little bit, for an older crowd, it's called Overwatch. So a little bit, probably like, I'd say like 12-year-olds to about like 18-year-olds play it. And everyone gets assigned a role. Some people are healers, other people go and fight, other people like support them, and other people are like protect them. So whenever you would recognize like the teamwork aspect of working with friends or what personality would fit each of these roles, I've seen a lot of kids, particularly like 2E kids and diagnosed with Asperger's or ADHD, really thrive in game environments like that because their ability to respond quickly to stimuli and their ability to take on their role and fulfill it and get that appreciation from others. I haven't seen that in the real world environment conveyed in such an effective way as Overwatch. But it's also sometimes a detriment where you get really frustrated or kids get super mad that other people are also really good at it. And then sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. So you also need those skill set to be able to acknowledge that I'm learning this skill and I'm good enough. And if I lose sometimes, it's okay because I'm still getting better at this.
Well, you've given me a new appreciation for video games. My kids are grown and video games have, just exploded in terms of what's out there. And I've never been very good at them, but but now I have a much better appreciation.
Yeah.
And I know you also suggest, maybe that parents play online games with their kids or let their kids tell all about what they're doing as a way to connect.
Absolutely. The more as a parent that you can sit down with your child and really engage in the task or even work through whatever it would be with them, they feel so much of a connection with you because you're really diving into their world and they know it's not your preferred activity. They know that you're doing it to connect with them. And any moment that your kid can look at you and admire you and be like, all right, you're really seeing me for who I truly am, rather than, making fun of the game or just saying like, you're not really interested or that's, you don't understand how it works, but still won't sit with me. Mm-hmm. So one fun experience, like, as a parent that I had, this is, 6 or 7 years ago, is there was this game that came out that my child saw someone playing on YouTube and said, Dad, how do I do this? And it took probably 10 hours outside of the game for me to figure out how to install my mods in Minecraft, how to go to a certain server and like how to figure out all of this. And he still probably isn't aware that it took me that much time. But the fact that I was able to have this thing occur, I didn't realize that all the other kids were like, whoa, you were able to do that? And you did that with your dad? That really built up his self-esteem and really built up his appreciation of me. And then like being able to convey that to other kids so that now he's able to do all those different things. But in reality, he's just telling other people like, I played Bed Wars and, we were able to, build over to the other person's base and then destroy their bed. And then we were able to like push them off of their bridge that they built. That doesn't sound like they were working on executive functioning skills or like emotional connection skills. But whenever you're in the moment, you get to appreciate it through that lens. And as parents, I think just being able to dive into that moment and appreciate that you can see things differently than your child and recognize the strengths of video games, you have a much higher chance of truly connecting with them and them coming to you for help whenever they need it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, outside of video games, you also have some very insightful techniques in your book for connecting with kids and skill building in a fun way. And I would love for you to share one of your favorites with us. Sure.
So one of my favorites is really helping children whenever they want to pay attention to their body and be able to slow it down. So it's the Hershey Kiss Challenge. Is kids love candy and they don't like sitting still for an extended period of time, and meditation doesn't always click. So the one game that we play is, let's put a Hershey Kiss in your tongue and then figure out whoever doesn't let it melt fast enough wins. So kids sit there and they focus like, oh no, if I bite it, it melts really fast. Or if I open my mouth, it's a little bit cooler. All of those executive functioning skills get developed while self-regulation. So usually kids sit for 5 minutes saying, how do I be as still as possible? And how do I figure out how to not let this thing melt? It's just a really fun exercise that you wouldn't normally think of as being a skill building technique. Or other times whenever kids are at a restaurant, we're sitting there at the table and we have two choices. I'm going to give you my phone, or we're going to fill out the mat there. Well, sometimes we have the phone, or sometimes we have food and you're not really eating it. Well, how do you come up with reasonable, creative questions that you can ask your child that they'll be thinking through and engaging in a task whenever it's an otherwise boring time. So it's like, how many French fries can you stack on top of each other without them falling over? And then kids start recognizing strategies for, engineering. So other times it's like, well, how do I, get a basketball on top of, the wall? Or, if we're just sitting like outside, like, how would you get a basketball on top of my roof of my car without using your hands? And anytime you get a child to reason through or come up with creative problem solving, you're making progress as a parent, that they're really loving trying to come up with a solution, and they're working on executive functioning skills, and they're not having that moment where they're saying, I'm bored, this is awful. Because every time you feel that I'm bored, this is awful, you know that a few minutes later it comes, I'm angry and I'm dysregulated and I'm going to make you feel bad. When in reality, they're just saying it's really hard for me to figure out how to self-regulate on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. So our brain is like the best toy ever, right?
Right.
I love your ideas. They're so creative and fun, and, really learning how to be mindful or to be flexible in our thinking. That can be really difficult for our students with learning or attention challenges, and especially students on the spectrum. You know, as as humans, we just like to hold on to our ideas and our routines because they make us comfortable. But the more rigid that we are, the more easily we're stressed or anxious or offended. So interacting with kids in a fun, imaginative way helps them to be more flexible and less rigid in their thinking. So uh, I really like that. In fact, even again, naming kind of what it is that they're learning, talking about flexible thinking and then recognizing, wow, look at that. You figured out 3 different ways to get a basketball up to the top of the car. That's really awesome. You were flexible in your thinking. I mean, just even pointing that out, I think is valuable in building that awareness and their ability to apply it to other things. So.
Thank you. And I think just having divergent reasoning skills is key for everyone, including adults, because sometimes we always just talk about like helping our kids with this. It's fun for us as well. And it makes that conversation that much more engaging.
Right, right. Well, if you're just joining us, I'm Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers, and my guest today is Michael Uram. We're talking about ways to connect, enjoy, and build skills with your neurodiverse thinkers. Let's do a check-in with Lauren and those of you joining us live.
Hello. Yes. So we have Joan Dolly just saying, I love the creativity in the strategies. We have parents that love, just all those ideas. I love those ideas. I'm going to try it with my 6-year-old with the Hershey Kiss Challenge. I was like, yeah, you need to work on some regulation. So I love that idea. We have Deanna saying, I like the idea of using productivity as a measurement of whether listening to something while doing homework is a good thing or not. My son will love the evidence-based comparison. Yes, I love that for our little scientists out there. It's so great. Okay, and then I have a lengthy question. It is about video games, and I'll kind of paraphrase from Facebook. Mom is saying, the question is, how can we as parents tell whether or not a video game is a passion or it's like kind of tending towards like OCD? Mom is kind of worried that her son is exhibiting OCD behaviors. What's happening is he has to, he's 14, has a phone, has to keep it out of his room at night. And so he leaves it in the living room, charging, iPad, Chromebook, everything like that in the living room. And they've been noticing that he's been getting up in the middle of the night, sneaking it and playing in the middle of the night, and kind of will obsess on just different elements of the game. Every conversation that they have, he relates to a video game, and that's kind of his only point of reference. And his only way to relate to anyone. He'll steer the conversation in that direction. So she, is kind of worried about seeing these kind of obsessiveness with video games. And then also the thing that worries her is that they're trying to regulate it. And, he's been failing his classes, and they took away access to his phone, and he's been, her word is catatonic, distraught, like just absolutely does non-functional, will not eat, will not, like, just cries. And so just, she's asking for some advice. Is this, a mental health issue? Is this, obsessive compulsive disorder? She doesn't know.
So I'll give you the short answer, and I'll give you, something else if the parent wants to go more on a deeper dive. So for any behavioral addiction, the main things that you want to look for is your impact on academics, your impact on socialization, and your impact on overall energy levels. And she referenced all three of those areas are impacted. So it would be more in line with that is probably like the most likely explanation for it. But there's also other ways where kids do have their particular interest, and it is something that they're able to do within a reasonable amount of time that doesn't impact those three areas. I'm also very weary, or kind of concerned that there are a few gaming companies out there that particularly kind of set up the game that you need to check in regularly. If you don't have your streak, then you lose out on whatever the bonus would be. So any kind of, like, the term's grindy. So grindy games, I'm not a fan of, where you have to spend hours on it and keep clicking up and building resources. Anytime you need a streak, anytime that if you get X amount of whatever, a certain level, and then you get some kind of reward, all of those, games help with long-term planning and then, distress tolerance and patience, but they really impact you that you deprioritize everything else in your life to be able to achieve that goal. So even in the most unhealthy situations, I see some positives, but it doesn't outweigh the negative. If you're failing grades and you're catatonic without that game, chances are the child doesn't identify other ways to be able to self-regulate or to feel that same emotion. So under kind of like the platform of emotional-based planning, it's really important to ask that child is, how can you get that same emotion that you did from the game? What identity did you get from that game? And whenever they start talking about what that is, you can then help them reason through other ways that they could get it without that game being necessary. So I can probably go through a list of different games, but I won't even go there because then people are like, well, what about this one? Our kids would defend it.
Yeah.
And grindy, and ask your kid, is this a grindy game? And they will definitely tell you one way or the other.
Are you serious? Wow. There's a whole nother world out there that I am not even
a whole different language.
Yeah. So interesting. I know we just always hear video games, and I hear, a couple of terms but I had no idea. I did know that they're wanting to keep users engaged with the game. I've seen we've had a ton of students that just like go on Twitch and just like want to watch other people playing games, like that's kind of a socialization. And I definitely understand that. But yeah, this obsession, we do hear parents say that a lot. It's like, it's kind of like they're obsessed and they can have no other pattern of thought outside the game. So that's really helpful advice for helping parents know whether or not they should get help for that for their child. Yeah. Okay. And we have Deborah Ann checking back in. Just Michael Uram has a lot of creative ideas that kids love, and the parents too. So just a supporter there. Thank you. That's all. Let's see the questions I see so far. So thank you. If you have additional questions or would like any of the follow-up resources that we talked about, again, a good place to go is our Mom Squad. That's a private Facebook group. I have made some guides related to just different issues that affect our kids, executive function, ADHD, dyslexia, and I list different resources as posts under each guide. So you can check out those links and resources in Mom Squad. It's a private Facebook group, but you do need to request to join. You can click on the link provided in the chat or go to Facebook groups and search the keywords SLC Mom Squad to request to join. And then we also have a virtual parent support group that meets monthly called Peace. So our meeting is this Thursday, November 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And we're going to be discussing attention-focused training strategies. And that plays a huge part in regulation, getting kids to just be aware of their attention. When do they lose their attention and how they can get it back? So really teaching some self-regulation strategies. Looking forward to that. That's this Thursday, November 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And it is a Zoom meeting. So you do need to register. Go to stillcenter.com/peace to get that Zoom link.
Perfect. Thank you, Lauren. This is LD Expert Live. I'm Jill Stowell here with licensed marriage and family therapist Michael Uram. Michael, what would you like to leave our viewers with today?
The most important thing that anyone walks out of my office with is hope. So I hope by me discussing this topic and giving you some new, fresh ways of viewing it, that you walk away from this conversation having a little bit of hope that things can be a little bit different. And that the more that we keep trying different creative ideas, whatever challenges are in front of us, it really gives us the emotional energy to sometimes accept them and then other times to keep growing. So I really want, everyone here to say, you know what? I do have a little bit more hope that there is, other ways to view this particular situation, and I don't feel as stuck as I did an hour ago.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for being here with us on LD Expert Live. This has been a great conversation. I so appreciate the respect and enjoyment that you have of kids with Asperger's and other neurodiverse thinking styles. And of course, we love realistic, creative, practical strategies.
Thank you, Joe. And I really appreciate all the Stowell Learning Center has done for the community over, the last, 7 or 8 years that I've had, clients come to me and really tell me how much it's made an impact in their lives.
Well, thank you. Here is Michael's contact information. He has a private practice in Orange County, California. Be sure and check out his book, Parenting and Asperger's. You'll find easy to read, practical guidance, and more of those creative strategies in it. This is LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning disabilities, dyslexia, and attention challenges. We're live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Next Tuesday, we're going to revisit a conversation that I had with Dr. Stuart Ablon in March. As the holidays approach and routines get disrupted, many students struggle with anxiety, behavior, overexcitement, and getting schoolwork done. Dr. Ablon gives parents and teachers clear, doable guidance on how to problem solve with your children so that everyone wins. Be sure to join us next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. At Stowell Learning Centers, we work with children and adults doing targeted brain training to permanently eliminate struggles associated with dyslexia, auditory processing, and other learning differences so that the student can become an independent learner and thrive in school. If you would like a free consultation for yourself or your child, give us a call or visit our website at stowellcenter.com. Thank you again, Michael and viewers, for being with us today. Please continue to share and subscribe. We'll see you next week.